Hey guys, welcome back to Living History. Today we're taking a deep dive into the world of the Mafia and exploring its rise to power in the United States. From its origins to the height of its influence during the Great Depression, we're uncovering all the secrets and untold stories of this notorious criminal organization. With our guest, we're taking a closer look at how the Mafia operated, how it changed over the years, and how it was perceived by the public. From Al Capone's money laundering schemes to the Mafia's cunning tactics to avoid legal consequences, we're uncovering all the juicy details that you won't find anywhere else. So sit back, grab some popcorn, and get ready to enter the world of the Mafia.
There is violence in Chicago, of course, but not by me and not by anybody I employ.
Hey everyone! I'm excited to announce our new collection, Heroes of History, featuring iconic figures like King Arthur, Julius Caesar, Constantine the Great, and Alexander the Great. These legends have shaped our world, and now you can show your appreciation with our exclusive designs on Redbubble. From t-shirts to phone cases, our high-quality print-on-demand products showcase stunning artwork submitted by our talented community of artists. Head to our Redbubble store now and celebrate the heroes of history. Everyone must think that the Mafia does not exist. This is the main rule of the Mafia, which has been reigning on the planet for 50 years. However, at the beginning of the last century, this was far from being the case. The Mafia not only existed, it actually ruled entire cities and industries of people's lives. Moreover, the Mafia was very brazen in declaring its existence and giving interviews in newspapers, and convincing people that it was impossible to defeat it. Where did this audacity come from? Why was it necessary? And why did the poor people adore the mobsters? That's what we'll talk about in the next couple of minutes together with our guest, Paulie Gualtieri. Paulie is a typical descendant of a family of Italian immigrants who moved to the United States. He lives in Chicago, 1931, the year when the empire of the famous Mr. Al Capone was at its height. Our Gualtieri comes from a poor family and has never counted on anyone's help. 10 years ago, while working in a factory, he was drinking in a secret pub, for officially the dry law reigned in the United States. It was there that he was offered an interesting job. It consisted of driving to Canada, where alcohol was legal, buying it and illegally transporting it to Chicago. All in all, it was an easy job, for the offer came not from anybody but from the Mafia fellows. They had everything covered, both at the border and at all the intermediate points. Of course, our Paulie was afraid. There was a chance of going to jail. But the pay of the so-called soldato working for the Mafia was pretty sweet. And once they were in prison, they knew that the Mafia would not leave them behind, providing them with good conditions of stay. At that time, no one shared with Gualtieri the plans or arrangements of the Mafia empire. Lower ranks of the chain existed separately, for in case they were caught, there was no evidence to charge serious mafiosi. After a few years, Paulie established himself and moved up the ranks, beginning to cooperate with the Fox, also known as Johnny Torrio. Our Gualtieri was a soldier, mostly collecting tribute from the stores he used to clandestinely deliver alcohol to. Of course, he also had to rob, shoot, and even kill people. The Mafia knew that the FBI and police had no right to kill in any case, so the assassination mission clearly confirmed the cleanliness of his ward. Even at this stage, there were no connections with the Mafia. All the assignments were delivered through subordinates, so as not to implicate the leadership. Paulie wanted to serve, and in the end, in 1931, he finally became a caporegime. Within 10 years, things had changed in Chicago. Johnny Torrio had built up a serious mob and retired a few years ago. Al Capone took the place and eliminated all competition and took the Chicago mob to the next level. Capone officially introduced the concept of racketeering. Now, tribute was collected not only from local illegal establishments, it was collected from everything, including banks and stores. However, it is worth noting that the concept of tribute itself was not such a bad thing in those days. Outside the door was the Great Depression, the worst crisis in U.S. history, and tens of millions of unemployed and embittered people were roaming the streets. Crime was flourishing across the country, and the police were seldom able to deal with it. And at the same time, by giving money to the Mafia, the store was guaranteed protection from any manifestations of criminal gangsterism. Roughly speaking, the Mafia acted as an analog of private security organizations, often even posting their employees wherever they were needed. Our Paulie had time to work in that position as well. But recently he became caporegime, one of the highest positions for a mere mortal. In military parlance, caporegime is a kind of mafia captain. He acted as a bridge between the leadership and the common soldiers. Gualtieri met with Al Capone several times in the secret family at a high level. and his job was to organize the execution of plans at a low level. For the most part, it feels like a routine, and the process is worked out to automatism. The most popular task is still the same: delivering alcohol. Only now, Paulie first directs a bunch of soldiers by bribing border guards at the US and Canada border, then Gualtieri gives the task of finding simple performers. In turn, sends other soldiers to collect from the whole affair. All communication is done solely through frontmen, and Gualtieri cannot be pinned down on any level. Officially, he is listed as the manager of a small laundry, and quite successful. In case anyone didn't know, Al Capone came up with an ingenious way of laundering money from illegal alcohol, prostitution, and racketeering. The mobster set up hundreds of laundry rooms all over the United States. They really worked, and the services were offered at very low prices. And the genius is that it is impossible to calculate the number of people who used their services, and Capone and his captains could draw up absolutely any numbers, quietly legalizing the business. Ironically, ordinary people were even grateful because they were able to do their laundry for mere pennies. In fact, the very concept of money laundering got its name from here. And laundromats were not the only thing the poor loved about Al Capone. For one thing, most of our Paulie's work did not intersect in any way with the common people. On the contrary, it was to the Mafia's advantage that the common laborer would feel safe. By earning money, he could visit their pubs, pay for illegal whiskey, and women. And what was there to steal from a poor citizen anyway? The Mafia was not interested in pennies. The guys worked with bigger fish. Often our Gualtieri would give the soldiers orders to deal with gangsters who were robbing and murdering ordinary Chicagoans. The police could investigate such cases for months, while the Mafia solved matters in a matter of hours, and was therefore beloved by the people. But even that is not all. Our Paulie allegedly used the profits from the laundromats to finance one of the soup kitchens that offered free food to the poor. There were many of these during the worst of the economic crisis in the United States. The decree for the funding of the soup kitchens was personally submitted by Al Capone. After all, firstly, helping the poor is a traditional calling card of Cosa Nostra and the Italian Mafia in general. And secondly, the media had a brutal campaign against Al Capone, and he needed to boost his image at any cost. A book called Mr. Capone by Robert Schoenberg compiles dozens of cases of charity done at the behest of a mafia boss. For example, our Paulie once provided a truck that collected the belongings of a woman evicted from her apartment, rented her a new one, and transported everything. Also, Gualtieri, under direct orders from Al Capone, blackmailed businessmen and forced them to allocate coal, clothes, and other vital necessities to the homeless and poor of Chicago. The same book we mentioned contains the words of dozens of eyewitnesses, and they all state that Capone was popularly regarded as a kind of Robin Hood. And we are talking even about policemen, who willingly took money from the Mafia, because the Mafia didn't ask for anything but violation of senseless laws. After all, the Mafia had its own laws and even its own court. A couple of years ago, in 1929, representatives of the largest factions in the United States gathered in Atlantic City and established common rules of the game. The internecine wars were over, and now all strategic decisions are made at an all-Mafia council. Our Paulie periodically received orders from there, and the vast majority of them consisted of eliminating especially violent outlaws and mafiosi. Only a couple of percent of the gangsters' activities intersected with ordinary people. More often than not, the Mafia lived in a separate world. Al Capone was one of the founders of the so-called Dome, and all of Chicago followed his instructions. Our Paulie had nothing to fear, for even the mayor of Chicago, William Thompson, worked for Al Capone and represented him quite openly. The Mafia was incredibly cunning in exploiting loopholes in the U.S. judicial system. It is impossible to prove guilt through circumstantial evidence and motives. As we have already mentioned, the mob never worked personally, preferring to use underlings and frontmen. As a result, human chains were formed that were almost impossible to decipher, and a paradoxical situation developed. Everyone in the United States knew that our Paulie Gualtieri and dozens of guys like him and Al Capone were Mafia. But no one could arrest them, because there was no motive or an element of a crime. In the end, however, the case became a matter of principle for President Woodrow Wilson. He personally demanded that the Secretary of the Treasury arrest Capone, and hard times began for the Chicago Mafia. No one could prove the crimes either, but the boys began to be pursued from other angles. Taxes, misdemeanors, parking violations, and carrying guns, everything was in play. The same criminal court called the Dome came up with a solution. Al Capone voluntarily went to jail for a year in order to appease the rampaging officials. The Mafia took advantage of another junkie reign in the U.S., the difference in laws between the states. In Chicago, Al Capone had the legal right to carry a gun, but in Philadelphia there was jail time for doing so. So the mob boss went south and specially corrupted police officers put him in a prison with a luxury cell, where Capone sat for a year. Meanwhile, our Paulie and the other mafiosi tried to put things in order, eliminating the slightest of accidents, and in general, they succeeded. But nothing could save Al Capone, and it was a matter of a personal feud with the president. The head of the Mafia was given an insane 11 years in prison for simple tax evasion. The media created the impression that the Mafia was defeated. There were showy arrests, but our Paulie easily avoided them all. For, as we have already mentioned, only pawns were quietly arrested. Who knew that they would be paid, while those in charge remained free, having moved down to a lower level? Capone became a victim, but his business quietly survived. As you know, thanks to movies and a lot of documentary material, it is still alive today. This does not negate the fact that our Paulie was a bad man and did illegal things. But if you judge from this angle, you can think of thousands of cases where official authorities sent people to their deaths by the millions. Pointless wars, bloated crises, famines, and dozens of other ills were invented very officially and legally. So one can understand why the people were warmed to the mob. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Also suggest your ideas for future releases in the comments. See you soon, folks.